as a child, we had a darkroom at home, and I was fascinated by this darkroom where you would have a negative and you put light through it and you put it on paper and you put it through some chemicals and then you had this black and white photograph. It was like alchemy. It was like kind of magic. And I think for me, it's a sort of similar thing with space and how I realised that, all of these places that were made to be forgotten, so the places underneath beds, underneath chairs, underneath tables, inside wardrobes, these places which were just for storing things or for dust to collect. And, I just found them partly, I suppose, to do with the sort of childhood imagination of the places that you would hide, but also a way of making those things concrete through the casting process. It made you a space and showed you a place that had never really existed before. And there was something about that, I think, that once I, cast the first thing and I looked at it and I just thought, wow, that's really changed. It's kind of the way I look at the world. It was a real sort of eureka moment, actually, and a very special moment, which I remember very clearly. And it sort of started at when I was at Brighton, and I did a metal casting course, and I just, I had spoons and I would just press them into sand and then pour in lead or aluminium, and from that you got this object that was a spoon but without its spoonness, so it didn't have the sort of cup in it anymore. It was solid. And, the same sort of thing as pouring plaster into a matchbox or something, and you kind of open it up and remove the matchbox and you have this little, plaster box. So, these things are very, very, very simple ideas, but once you sort of start to use them and repeat them and make 100 spaces that look the same or similar, or cast a whole house, or, these things that are then sort of blown up into, a different experience of the world, I think it can become very profound, I suppose. I think, I love materials. I love playing physically with materials, but I also love colour and surface and, the things that traditionally come with painting or printmaking or whatever. And, for me, working with those two things combined, whether it's painting it white and painting it and painting it and painting it, which is, in itself quite a kind of complex process, because I'm not just painting, I'm painting it and filling in things and painting it and then taking something out. And, I'm sort of sculpting with the paint in a way. And I think with, working with bronze and patinating that, or working with paper and using silver leaf on that, or, any of the things that I do, or, very, very early on when I just worked with plaster and then would use different sort of things like oil or soap or whatever that would leave different traces on the surface, or ways of picking up dirt from the surface. So it's always something that I've been very conscious of, actually. And even when I was at Brighton, very, very young, doing things, I'd always use different ways of interpreting a material. The process of making things has always been something that's kind of fascinated me, and I've always tried to use the materiality of the material for it to be the sort of finished form in a way. But occasionally that's different. And actually now, because I've started making things more with real things, with using something like corrugated iron, and then painting it and painting it and painting it, it's sort of whiter than white. It's whiter than the plaster. And it does something else. It sort of makes a space, rather than a hole. And yeah, it's just now, I think, as a more mature artist, what's interesting is to really be able to play with this kind of lexicon of words and lexicon of materials, and it's like being a magician, having lots of different tricks that you can use and make a performance from.
I mean, there's also a lot of boldness in your work, and it also has to do with scale. What does size do for you? What's important about sort of the large formats for you?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, because there are two, I think, factors coming together over the time of my practice. One is that I've always had a very natural relationship to taking a space for granted, be it as a child or as a teenage. So I would always take for granted that I can do something there, or maybe larger works. Even as a kid, I put all these, glued together lots of things, to have a larger surface. So this idea that there is no limit to being someplace, even though it's officially not mine. That was, for example, always there, I think. But then, and also a natural understanding of size being my gesture, my habitat being a large range, going places over there or here or there, and that could all be making sense in a way because I'm going there and putting it together.
So it's just adequate.
Yeah, the attitude was a given, but then of course, with doing it, you discover more deeply why you do it.
Yeah.
And that changes also your attitude towards it. And I think that the large format, of course, is something that is, you do the same you do in a small one, but with much less work, So the idea of expanding is actually a slow motion movement. It is actually not making more complex things in larger spaces, and it's just the opposite. It's like taking things apart. And as you take a suitcase apart, you need more space, So that is actually the activity also. So it's not only taking space that's not given to me, which is also something that has to do with the fact of I'm not okay with not having that space, It's almost like I take it. Writing it out is like I'm having it. But it's also taking painting apart, in a sense. And the other one was discovering by doing so that my work is actually not happening on the surface, but in front of it. So, which is difficult to discover when you have a small studio with a 1x2 meter painting, because then it's almost as if the 1x2 meter surface is your realm of activity. And that is what I discovered not the case in my practice. So it's actually in front of it. And then the residue somehow lands on the surface. So it's coming from outside, It's not coming from inside out.
I very much like the suitcase metaphor. It makes me feel
You seem to know that.
Yes, it makes me, and now it sort of turns into something else. Sometimes you think,
Or when you want to find something, sometimes you have to take things away and say, it was somewhere. It was somewhere. Where is it, And that is not, that is kind of a thing that I think also has to do with
it always seemed to me like a disorderly process. Now I think I can like this process of...
or you paint more, you go on and you go, maybe I should actually paint here, What would it be like if it was going there? And then before you know it, you're 50 meters moved away from where you started. And that is kind of a very interesting experience.